Is really where I'd be looking.
Yeah, hopefully that answers the question. We have another one. How do you introduce event sourcing and CQRS to a non-event source system? So this is migration, right? So this is an interesting one because you know, we do this as a sidecar. There, you know, I talk about slowly extracting and listening and the strangler pattern and all these different fancy words. But maybe Greg has an easier way to talk about slowly migrating or introducing CQRS and event sourcing to a traditional system that already exists.
So normally you're going to be following a pattern of breaking up services or microservices or whatever vocabulary you're going to want to use, and then looking at taking one or two of those services, microservices, bringing them forward. To be fair, the vast majority of places you're going to go have no idea what a service or a microservice actually are, which is going to be your first hurdle, long before you get to event sourcing.
Yeah, the whole thing about microservices and boundaries and subsystems and, you know, whatever other terminology you want, bounded context. This is the problem, is that we have about 5 different terms for the same concepts in tech, right? So why I try not to even use CQRS or event sourcing words when I'm dealing with introducing the concepts, because ultimately someone will go and Google that, and then they'll start to find things with other people's opinion of how to do it, and it'll really derail things. So I try to use common English terms for everything and focus on the information to do that. So if you want 2 subsystems because you have 2 teams, you can start to talk about, you know, the complexities that each team should take on, so they both have a balanced amount of work and they care about those things.
There's a question that came up I'd like to address.
Sure, go for it.
Value from events. Is it possible to know that up front? One of event sourcing's main value is deriving future business value based on new interpretations of existing persistent events. Is it possible that an event may not hold much value now, but could hold value in the future?
We have someone that's planted in the audience that asked that for you. Go ahead.
How many people have added a new feature before? Was that new feature valuable? I mean, what we're basically talking about here is, how can I predict what somebody in the future may ask me a question about? I can't.
So you might as well keep everything, yeah.
That's why I store everything. I have no idea what they may ask me in the future. It's a lot cheaper for me to buy disks than to buy like possible risk mitigation strategies for me having lost something.
I hear time machines are expensive, Greg.
It depends which ones you're buying.
Yeah, I'd rather buy the disk drive version where I store everything than the actual time machine where I have to go back and say, oh crap, we better store this extra piece. I hope that answers Craig's question, and we could talk about that for a while. We also have the inevitable unique constraint in the read side that's due to eventual consistency. So the classic, the number 1 question, Greg, that comes up in the CQRS and Event Sourcing
Okay, obvious
forums
answer.
is...
Obvious answer number 1, put the unique constraint inside of your stream name.
Yes, exactly. But we should tell
obvious
everyone that
number 2, put it over in a read model, make it eventually consistent, and on failure, it raises an event that it occurred. Given that you're querying the read model at the point of writing the transaction to ensure that it does not already exist, that queue between the write model and the read model should be relatively small, and it's highly unlikely you should end up with something in it. Step number 3, reservation service. Do it consistently. Does this make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a standard answer. I just wanted to make a point that is you know, in every CQRS event sourcing forum, that is probably the number one question about uniqueness constraints, who's first to write a specific entity. Registration and a unique email is always the example that's given. So there's many ways to solve this. There's
Well,
even
there's also the whole thing that I sometimes go into, which is let's take a whiteboard and let's talk about what happens over the next 72 hours,
right.
which can actually get to be a lot more fun and start seeing the value of why you're doing it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why what you're seeing on your screen right now is why we stretch it over time. This actually is what you're looking at is an event modeling canvas that is being developed. But this comes from Greg's work when I was across the street from him. How he was talking about how to put trades together, and basically we didn't look at screens at that time, but we're just looking at series of events. If we could talk about how that information changes over time by using these sticky notes on the whiteboard and drawing on the whiteboard to show over time what does this look like, and like Greg said, talk with the business about is this like over the next 72 hours is this email going to be a problem. Do we care that do we have optimistic or pessimistic concurrency, in layman's terms, of course, last one wins or whatever terminology you want to use, but you show it over time, right? So does that make sense for that question? Oh, what are the red flags? What are the red flags, misunderstandings folks should address before starting a new ES project? There's many. First of all, if people have been through learning things by themselves, they could come from a perspective of, this is complicated because I need all this infrastructure. That's one that I come up against. Because they look at all the infrastructure, whereas what I shared before, it's really just I have another screen here I can share, and I'll show you a really simple one that literally does what that registration. Oh, sorry, it's a time tracking system for keeping track of hours, and I use this as an example all the time. And this is 160 pages, doesn't even have an event store in it. I think the bottom got cut off here. But does everyone see the code here? This is a simple web app where we just run it and then we look at what page we hit. If it's a post, well, then we do our command and write down the event, which is literally a write file. And then what we do is just return the view. So even if it's just a get instead of a post, we still fill the template with a model that's get today and yesterday. And this model is transient. We don't materialize it yet because there's not many events. But guess what? If the performance starts to degrade because of more and more events, I can start to materialize that and really change that to be more of a live report without much work. A very simple amount of work will do that. And so here's my model. What are we doing? We're just going over all the events and just add them to the model that are, there's our where clause. We basically are talking about today and yesterday, and that's it. So the rest is infrastructure stuff. Here's construction of a model, tokenization of our template. This is standard library and nothing else. So what we have is a very simple system to show that. So to me, that's the number one thing that I do when I come up with new people trying to understand CQRS event sourcing. They're going to hit the Martin Fowler article, which means that there's books and books on the shelf, and you're dragging in, an entire library of knowledge to be able to do it. And that's not true. In fact, you need to know less to do event sourcing because it's easy. Event sourcing means getting to this as fast as possible. It's the first thing you do. Just write down what happened. and everything else falls away from that. I'm not sure if there's other, I think there's other things such as, well, if I have too many events, then my read models are going to take forever to populate. You can close the books, do snapshots, all sorts of other things to get around it. And it's just like running any other system. If you're going to require, 10 years of data to just, spin up the service, you might want to think twice about what you have online. And Greg talks about cold storage for some of the events, warm hot storage for the newer ones. An event store is actually getting a lot more features in that aspect. Actually, all eventing frameworks are kind of following what you get in the traditional RDBMS world, right? This is a little bit more of a newer world in terms of the tech stack for it. Greg, anything you want to add to about the sort of first what are the upfront concerns that people may have?
What are their concerns, or
yeah,
what
the
are
red
valid
red
concerns?
flags,
Because
misunderstandings,
those are two very different
right?
stories.
Yeah, misunderstandings. What misunderstandings do people have? What are the common ones? I tried to touch on a few, but you probably have your own version.
I've just seen so many of them.
I know.
The biggest one I see is when you have all of your events end with the word updated.
Oh, cruddy events. Yeah.
And then they're like, I don't see the value of doing this. And it's like, well, yeah, because you've basically rebuilt your database's transaction log.
Yeah, they have to have meaning. The business activity monitoring you want to have built in from the beginning. That's why you do it. My earlier example.
This is where all of your gains come from, is that there's a material difference between this item being deactivated versus activated being set to false.
Right. We have another more advanced question, I think. Sorry, Tamir, I hope that's a good enough answer. There's a lot to, I mean, you could have a whole meetup just about those red flags because there's many, and I think it just comes from people coming in from a regular background, and so there could be any number of concerns to talk about. But let's get on to the next one, see if we can get a few more before we have to go. We have about half an hour left. See if Greg can stay right until the end before he has to get his fishing rods. So do you carry as much state as possible with your events, similar to snapshots, or skinny as possible with only the information pertinent for the command event flow workflow? I've always tried to stay skinny, but only have limited experience using event sourcing on a simple domain.
Adam,
so I think it's on the right track here, right?
I got this one. You stay as skinny as possible. There are times that you need to raise fatter events, let's say integration events. And what you generally do is use something almost identical to a projection, which listens to the 4 events that are happening beforehand, keeps a little bit of state off of them, and raises a fatter event. I know that's a very distilled answer. Does it make sense to everybody?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's, when you're doing distributed systems and combining multiple systems, there's this idea of a public schema and a private schema. The private schema for events is what you use to keep track of your internal state for that one service. And the public schema is the contract that glue you use for teams to communicate with one another, where you really don't want to be changing them so often because it's disruptive. You're interacting with other systems and other programmers and other teams. I don't know if you want to add to that and why those events might be fatter than the other ones. Right, Greg? Am I right? Am I wrong? Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, thank you, Darren, for the question. At what place in the infrastructure does the reservation service sit? Above the command handler or before the event store? I think the reservation piece is on the side. It's a part of the workflow rather than...
Reservation service can sit in multiple places. It can either sit in front of or behind the domain.
So I hope that answers the question. We could, again, a lot of these, if you write down your question and Greg's answer. We could do a meetup just about that topic and design an example together to have some implementation that you could use in your real projects and have the
By the way,
community.
avoid the reservation service as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I would say the same. Try and make the data stand up on its own. Be idempotent. Talk about designing your system in a way that if you flip the switch off on the power on the server and you flip it back on, somehow things just continue to work. It's really powerful from being for not giving yourself a lot of unnecessary work. Really, I think is what Greg is trying to say. Why avoid? What problems does reservation system generate?
Well, if I have a reservation service, then I need to be able to talk to a reservation service.
It's another moving piece in your system, overall system.
What happens when my reservation service is down? Then nobody can create anything. Yay! So would we rather have 0.1% of conflicts, or would rather have nobody able to do anything?
Yeah, exactly. But is there any other problems than the infrastructure ones? I don't think the reservation system is really infrastructure problem. It's really about the consistency of our information problem. And maybe that's where the complexity sometimes comes up, is that we conflate a lot of the infrastructure around event sourcing and CQRS with the actual business workflow steps, like what are our state transitions? What do we
Oh, and by the way, I just want to leave a very, very brief note for people that are doing this. If you're using Event Story, you already have a reservation service.
Yeah, exactly.
It's built in.
It's your ID for your stream.
You can do it other ways, but that's one way. You can also use stream name.
Right. Has anyone? Well, I guess we can expect everyone to be a brand new person, so we're not going to ask if anyone's using it. I think we missed a couple of questions above. I think we skipped down a little bit. Does the example shown have a GitHub repo? Is that mine, the one that I'm showing, or is that the event model? This one is on my GitHub repo. It's under the event modeling repo, and it's the time tracking one. The one about the cafe, the diagram is not, but we can make it available. Actually, someone might have put it up somewhere. I just don't know where. It's probably in the event modeling Slack conversation. So if you go there, you should probably be able to ask someone or find it mentioned in the general chat or the time tracking chat. What else do we have? Any other questions? We got about half an hour, maybe a little bit less, probably about 25 minutes. So go ahead with your questions. Otherwise, we can.
Ooh, that's a good question. And I'm going to reword the question slightly. I hope Tamir does not have a problem with this. Should request reply, I'm going to say request response pattern events be avoided at all costs, or is it valid in some cases? No, there should never be a request response pattern used for events. It's always request subscribe, or should I say publish subscribe. So I publish an event and I subscribe to anything that may occur from it. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way, that it's a request response is a bad pattern. It's just one that you do not use when events, unless your underlying pattern happens, your underlying protocol happens to support it. A perfect example of this would be Atom feeds. But you're still essentially doing a subscribe at this point. It's just being done over request response.
Yeah, the only difference is when you're trying to go fast at the beginning, you might not want to have a lot of infrastructure concerns and just get your state right. So I do, as you can see in the code, really do everything in one request, web request, but it has the logical patterns of what Greg is talking about. So don't take it too literally, especially when you're getting going. The important thing is you're publishing an event, like Greg said, which means that it's already been written somewhere, and now you're saying that, hey, this event's here. Uh, let others know, and sometimes the shortcut is just replay all events if you're just starting out, because the logic that you write for that you're still going to have, even if you have the more mature pub sub architecture with separate processes that house different read models, and you've gone from your initial 5 users to the 5 million, and you're a successful company with a lot of infrastructure. So the beautiful thing about event sourcing and CQRS is that very important code that your business is paying you for, where the value comes from, gets to live through all of the scaling of your business going up, which is really a real powerful concept and trait of this, where I don't think that really happens a lot in other approaches. I know that MVP, part of a startup is always, well, now we got to throw everything away and start from scratch because the thing we bolted together doesn't scale. And we can explore why it doesn't scale. It's the coupling everywhere, using normalized data canonical models for everything, and people stepping on each other's toes. It just grinds to a halt. But few people see that you can avoid those problems if you pay attention and be true to what your business is doing and store the events. Then you really do, not for any real price. If you get good at this, this is just as fast as using any other development, architecture for your development for a startup. Most of the read models and how you use them in a web page will use your traditional stack of populating some data set or whatever you have. So even some ORM can sit over those read models. It doesn't matter. So hopefully that makes sense. Does every event have a subject, an entity whose state is changed by the event? Similar events have multiple subjects for a single event. I'm not sure what subjects mean. Maybe Matt, you're talking about getting
like
topics.
Customer or cart or the thing in the world that.
Oh, an entity. Yeah, I mean, it depends. Greg, I mean, you probably would describe this as something from DDD, like an aggregate, right?
I'm just reading.
Like subject in this sense, it's subject object predicate, like from grade 4 English, right? the thing that's being modified or has been modified, and you're recording the event about that.
Yeah, so normally it's going to come back to an aggregate, but aggregates can vary widely in terms of how large they are. I have dealt with many systems that were only a single aggregate.
Yeah, I guess on Friday we could revisit some invariants or business rules that have to synchronize a couple of different entities together. We've gone over that in our meetup before, where it's not just about sending a command to one order, but maybe doing some sort of a command requires knowledge of what's going on in a few other related orders.
Well, and very often when you start having many points of smaller aggregates trying to work consistency between them, what we start ending up with is things like process managers on top.
Yeah, something to orchestrate what we're trying to do.
I guess my problem is with aggregate is it's a term that can be anything you need it to be in a lot of ways. And I'm sure when I talk to people about events, I like to think about the real world description of what you're actually documenting has happened. And so aggregate leaves a lot of people flat, especially if they're not technical. They don't really get what that means, and maybe I'm not really explaining it well, or even I don't understand it.
Can I offer a suggestion on what to do instead?
Yeah.
Talk about streams.
Okay.
Not aggregates.
Streams?
Yes, and a aggregate can map to a stream, but streams can just be their own thing as well.
Yeah, that's how we think about that's how we think about entities in event modeling all the time. When we draw out systems like this, we just have streams below of like, this is one thing, here's all the related events.
But we don't need to think about entities on top. What would we name this stream? What is in this stream? Is it events about this one thing on the one receipt, or does it also include the credit card transaction? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's actually more confusing, because the credit card transaction is a separate thing than the purchase that it's being applied to. I mean, I guess it really breaks down to how you're modeling. I wouldn't.
Well, yeah, that's why I gave it as an example, because it really breaks down to how we're modeling. They should be able to understand things at this point, why we might have separate streams.
Yeah.
Do we want the financial transactions mixed in with the order transactions, or are they different?
Yeah, those are not easy to answer because they vary with your business. And even in your business, you may have a different interpretation, a different need 6 months down the road. And this is another reason why event sourcing is so good, is because as opposed to traditional architectures and traditional modeling exercises, we have a very static picture of usually noun, verb, order, dot, complete, those types of abstractions, where really we want something that's more temporal, that accounts for what our understanding of the system is at this point, and it's going to be as fluid as possible to our next understanding of the business. Whereas I think the traditional approaches really want you to, okay, things have changed, time to, look at the whole thing and redesign it to see if it still makes sense. I think it's a little bit more organic with what we can do with writing down facts in streams. As our understanding of the system changes and our demands of the systems change, we start to use different events. We start to map old ones to new ones. Greg has a whole book on event versioning, and of course he has his course on the core pieces of CQRS and event sourcing.
And I mentioned it earlier in response to a question, I believe, but if you go look the versioning book, you can read the entire book online for free.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also have where I lost your tab with your course, but I have it here somewhere. Greg, here it is. All right, got it. So yeah, it's on Vidler under subscriptions, and I'm going to just share the screen so people see where they can go and do that. And it's how many hours of instructions do you have on there?
Oh, I think a three-day class ballpark.
So how many classes? Like how many hours in total?
20, 25.
Yeah, so quite a lot of instruction, and it's full of the core concepts we quickly skimmed over here. I'm just going to share that basically you can see Vidler. .com. If you search for Greg, you'll find it there. Yeah, 24 videos. You can.
I think it's about 20 hours total.
Yeah, so definitely a good baseline is to hear Greg present everything, and then of course supplement that with all sorts of other workshops. We'll be doing more workshops with Greg that are more hands-on, with all of us and Greg being there. So look for those coming in the future, and then as we can start to go and fly to other cities, we can hopefully do that in person. But there'll be more virtual
fly in
ones.
Other cities. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, you got to backpack across. That's why you have that whole rig you bought, so you can backpack across the country, right?
Well, yeah, because you can't fly. You have to
Yeah,
like walk.
yeah, exactly. So Greg's starting in the Northeast and heading down south somewhere with a fishing rod so he can eat. Yeah, so we'll leave it at that. I think we're gonna do this again. I think there's a lot of interest. I think it was kind of a couple of days notice about this. So we're gonna continue this on Friday with advanced topics. If Greg is around, we're gonna have him, but we're gonna start to look at all the different types of specific text for different sizes of solutions. Look more closely at Event Store. We'll look more closely at Kafka. There's been a lot of event sourcing Kafka talks. Look at in building your own event store, we can start to dissect those core little pieces. I know Greg does a bunch of live coding for showing exactly how easy that is. I also have a small little one-pager that I wrote years ago in C# that basically does the job of making a file-based event store. And yeah, we can explore a lot of the more advanced topics in there. There's we hardly scratched the surface of this stuff. So I hope someone everyone got something out of this. And if you have further questions, both Greg, myself, and others that are on here are on Twitter. We're usually all connected and tweeting about CQRS. So always look for the hashtag CQRS. I'm sure you can find all of us. For the event modeling part that I do, there's a whole Slack channel. There's a whole Slack channel for the CQRS DDD as well. So those two channels are good. Any other resources you can think of, Greg, that people could go to?
They're rather scattered, which makes it a bit hard.
Yeah.
I would say to use one of the mailing lists or chat rooms and ask more specific questions that people are actually interested in finding information on.
Yeah. And this meetup, we do this twice a week. So also feel free to if it's a big topic or something worth talking about, or there's enough interest.
Once, now we expect you 100 times a year, really?
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't ask you to be here all the time, but when you're available and can drop in for even 15 minutes, it's always nice to have you. But the community's always here.
I'm just taking a piss out of you, Adam, because you're on speaker. So.
Yeah, I know. It's I wanted the meetup because I always wanted to have a forum for discussing event sourcing and things related. And I find waiting around for someone to bring up the topic in a meetup that happens once every 2 months wasn't enough for me. So yeah, I would invite people to join the meetup, and rest assured we're going to be covering a topic that you're thinking of for sure, since we meet twice a week, every week, pretty much all year long, except when I have either an illness or I have to take care of my son or something. For the most part, it's twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. We're going to try to do this again on Friday. If Greg's available, I'm sure he'll drop by to answer some of those questions, but we'll put our brains together and diagram and program our way out of all those problems together. So thanks again for everyone, for being here, and I hope to see you at the next one and for subsequent ones. This will be on YouTube, and so hopefully you can point your friends at it, and then be part of the next one we throw in another month or two.
Right. Peut-être tu peux faire en autre en français.
Mais oui, I don't know how good I'm going to be in French, Greg, but I can listen to you struggle.
Pas ma problem.
So Greg wants to go to Montreal desperately. So as soon as the border opens up, I'm sure he'll be up there doing CQRS event sourcing lectures in French. Even though I'm a native Polish speaker, trying to do technical talks in Polish was a struggle. So I can only imagine what this will be like for Greg in French. So, all right. Thanks, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for coming again, and we'll see you soon. Look for the recording on YouTube within about a week.
Enjoy,
Bye,
guys.
everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye.